Hi there, you're watching the maiden edition of Wellness Tips on Media Wire Express. Wellness Tips is a program that focuses on addressing the many health challenges facing women in our societies today. Today, we discuss a very critical topic, a topic that concerns your mother, a topic that concerns your wife, daughters, sisters, and perhaps the girlfriends. You might want to join us on our social media platforms at MediaWire Express on Instagram and Facebook. For today's topic, we will be discussing human papillomavirus, popularly referred to as HPV. My name is Marilyn Badodomasa, and my guest today is Dr. Anna Graham. Dr. Anna Graham is a distinguished women's health medical doctor currently serving at the CCBRT Hospital in Dar es Salaam. She will share some insights on the topic and also provide remedies to curtail this virus. You might want to join us live as this promises to be very exciting, educative, and informative. Many thanks for joining us, Dr. Anna Graham.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
Why are we so bothered about HPV and what is it all about, please?
So HPV, or human papillomavirus, are a group of viruses, and there's over 200 of them. And usually they are completely harmless. And so what happens is you get the HPV virus, then your body's own immune system clears it on its own and it doesn't cause any problems. Now, there's some different types of HPV, what we call low-risk HPV and high-risk HPV, that if they stick around, they can cause problems. So low-risk HPV causes genital warts, and then high-risk HPV can cause a number of different cancers. Now, it can cause cervical cancer, it can cause vulval cancer, vaginal cancer, penile cancer, anal cancer, and also throat cancer. And so the most common of those by far is cervical cancer. And the cervix is the neck of the womb, so the neck of the uterus in a female. And cervical cancer is a really big problem here in Tanzania. It's the most common female cancer, and it kills over 6,000 women every single year. So it's transmitted via skin-to-skin contact. So when we're thinking about that, we're thinking about sexual contact. So we're thinking about sexual intercourse, which could be vaginal, or it could be anal, or it could be oral. And that's how it's transmitted between people. And so you can lower your risk of transmission via using condoms to have sexual intercourse. Now, that won't completely take away the risk, but it will definitely lower the risk. But the really good news is that we have a brilliant HPV vaccine which can prevent you from getting some of the different strains of HPV so that you would never even be at risk. Now, it doesn't cover all of the different strains of HPV, all of the 200, but there's different vaccines that cover different ones, but the one here in Tanzania covers 4 types. 2 of the high-risk types, which cause cervical cancer, and 2 of the low-risk types, which can cause genital warts. You don't know whether you've got the virus or not. There's usually absolutely no symptoms for having HPV, so you don't know if you've got it, you don't know if your partner's got it, unless you have a test. So what we would say is that if you start to get symptoms, the symptoms would be because they've already started to make changes on the cervix. So what happens, I'll talk specifically about cervical cancer and the progression to that. It's because what happens is the HPV virus infects the cells on the cervix, and then those cells start to grow abnormally and they turn into precancerous cells, and those precancerous cells then, if the HPV stays and is not treated and your body doesn't clear it, those precancerous cells can develop into cancerous cells. So when we're thinking about if we're getting any symptoms, the symptoms we're getting are because those cervical changes have already happened. So the most common symptom that you would experience is bleeding after sexual intercourse or bleeding in between your periods. So if you experience any kind of abnormal vaginal bleeding, you should see your healthcare professional. Also, if it was a later stage, you may be getting pelvic pain. So if the precancerous cells were progressing, you may get weight loss, you may get a loss of appetite, tiredness, pain in the legs or swelling in the legs. So it depends on where we were in that journey. So the main health complications is the cervical cancer. So it could be any of the other cancers as well, but the one that we're primarily concerned about for women is cervical cancer because that's the one that's so prevalent here. HPV is just a different type of infection, but this one's a viral infection, whereas candidiasis is a fungal infection. So it's completely different. So the HPV vaccine is absolutely crucial. It's crucial to stopping cervical cancer and it's crucial to protecting our girls and our women. So this vaccine has been around for quite a long time now. So it's been used in Australia for over 20 years. So we have a really good profile of whether it has any long-term complications, and it does not. It is going to protect you against HPV and potentially cervical cancer and the other cancers mentioned, as well as getting genital warts. Now, we know in Australia they are already moving towards being able to completely eliminate cervical cancer. And that's not just with the vaccine, that's also with screening, so with cervical screening, which we'll talk about in a minute. But we know that this vaccine does not cause infertility. It does not cause girls to be more promiscuous. And we need to think about this as a protection against cervical cancer. HPV is so common. 80% of all people, men and women who've had sex, will at some point get HPV. The majority of those will clear it all on their own. This is a normal part of life. This is not something that we need to shy away from. So the WHO recommends that all girls are vaccinated between the ages of 9 and 14. And so it's part of the Tanzania National Immunisation Programme. So they should be offered it as part of that. So we would want women to usually have had the vaccine, the girls to have had the vaccine before they're sexually active, which is why we give it in the immunisation programme via schools and local healthcare facilities. Now, you can also have it later on in life. So you can have it, and we think that there's benefit of having it all the way up to the age of 45. But generally it protects you before you've come into contact with the HPV virus. So we don't generally screen just for HPV, although some countries are piloting that. So what we want to do is we want to screen your cervix. So the recommendations for Tanzania are that we would get cervical screening every 3 years after the age of 30, okay? And that's because generally when people are younger, their immune system clears the virus very, very well. So from 30, we would want cervical screening. Now, cervical screening in Tanzania is done in 2 different ways. One, with a pap smear, so a cervical pap smear, which is where we press a small brush over the neck of the womb, so over the cervix. It is not painful. And then we put that onto a slide, and those cells are looked at under the microscope to make sure that there's no cervical changes. The second way that is recommended in Tanzania is with something called visual inspection with acetic acid. And that's where we paint a solution onto the cervix and then look at the cervix to see whether we can see any changes. Now, both of those should be done every 3 years over the age of 30. However, if someone has HIV, they must get screened every year. And that's because when your immune system has been lowered, then we know that you need to have the screening more often because the cervical cancer could progress more quickly.